and welcome to this video. In this video I will go over this material that is used in this scene, which uses a combination of techniques without much texturing. This video is intended for the students of Digital Arts and Entertainment for the second year course level editing. So I'll get right into it. When looking at materials, I like to first have a general look which goes upstream and then kind of follow the mod downstream again. So I'm using material attributes node here. So my end node is just has just one input. First thing I do here is, or last thing I do actually, is to add this dirt. This is the last thing we saw in class. And to make it easy, I'll split it up into parts using these nodes. Nodes are comments. So I can select everything here, press C, and that will create a comment, and I'll call this one dirt. So we'll look at the dirt in detail later on. So the next thing here is the image occlusion, which is a pre-made material function in Unreal, and that links to the image occlusion map, the texture from the panel. Maybe this is a bit small to create for a comment, but this thing here where we blend our normals from our basic materials with the normals from our panel map. Now what we also do is I gave every panel some tilting, so I'm going to place a comment around this as well, maybe like, not sure how to do it, maybe like this. Call this tilting, sorry, that's styling. Maybe I'll put this outside and call this normal, just normal, just like that. So I am actually messing up my lines a bit, but I'm making these sections. And then here we finally come to the standard blend, where we blend a simple paint from a custom material layer and a simple metal from a material layer. So maybe I'll put these together into a comment paint, and metal. Ideally I should also add parameters in here, so I can control, for example, the roughness or the exact color of the metal through those parameters. But those are being blended, and the alpha that is used in this blend, this is also a standard node, is in here. So I'll select all of these nodes, and call this one scratches. And then I'll pull this texture out. So if you look in general, there's a dirt section, there's a tilting section, there's the scratches, and then we have the materials. So now I'll go down the stream. So I'll start here. So this is our paint layer. Now if you double click on a material function, you enter that material function and you can see what it does. So this is everything in the paint layer. It's fairly basic. There are two textures which aren't loading as fast as I'd like them to load, but there are two textures. One grayscale texture which is used for the roughness, and one and one normal map used for a normal map. Those two textures are scaled using a parameter, so we can adjust the size of these paint bubbles. They're also fairly strong. That's because we can tone them down later. For the roughness, I use this trick, which is often used in the Unreal Engine, to control the roughness of our paint. And yeah, that means we can make lots of different feelings for our paint. And of course, for a color, we have a color, and our metallic is simply straight set to 0, which is the default value, but just to make it clear. So that's our paint layer. Let's go back. Alright, so sorry about this cut. I had accidentally moved some stuff around. So that's our paint. That's going on in our paint. I think this, even though it's simple, allows us to kind of make a large variation of different paints and different feels, whichever fits in your level, whichever fits in your environment. Okay, very similar for the metal. I just didn't connect any parameters yet, but it's very similar. So a color, correct metallic base color, that's important for metals. Of course, metallic set to 1, and again, two textures. Controlling the roughness, because that's especially for metals, that's quite sensitive, the roughness. And then we have also a normal map, of course, with some variation. Okay, and here it looks quite terrible here. Alright, so the next node here is of course a standard blend. So as you know, that's just filled with lerps that lerp all these inputs from those two materials. Now, what's really important is the alpha. What do we put into the alpha? Well, quite a bunch actually. And it's a bunch of nodes which end up in this scratch mask. So whatever is white here is metal, whatever is black is still paint. This is variation, and this is the add of the variation. So I'm kind of like skipping those. So imagine I'm just linking those up, and this is just one continuous line. Then you see a bunch of adds here. So this texture, and this offset are all added together. See, those two values are added together. Now, if you add stuff together, it doesn't matter in which order you do it, and it doesn't matter which ones go on top and which ones go on the bottom. In the end, they're all piled up into one big heap. So this is the result from those three. I'm kind of gonna go backwards here. So this is the result from those three things, which right now is a texture, or is a texture that is has these darker gray, well, middle gray areas here, and then white on the edges. Now, if you multiply this with itself 20 times, so power node 20 times, the exponent, or 10 times maybe, it's good enough, I don't know, then those gray, middle gray values, they will become black. So 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5, that's a curve that goes down and becomes black. Well, of course, if something is 1 or higher than 1, that's a curve that will go exponentially up. So we definitely have to clamp at the end to make sure that the bright values are just white and not, I don't know, a very high value. and that the black values are just yeah, not lower than 0, even though that yeah, it might happen actually if it's a negative. It's possible to have a negative number in here, so also we don't want that, because if you lerp between two colors but you go higher than 1 or lower than 0, you might have a kind of unexpected strange color. I mean, it makes sense mathematically, but it won't make sense to you. Yeah, it won't be a color that you'd want in there. Okay, so what do we add together here? Well, first off is this texture, which has in the green channel that we're using here, so it's a gray pack texture, has a bunch of chips and scratches and stuff going on. Some pixels should be 1 or almost 1, some pixels should be 0 or almost 0, and then a whole range of values in the middle. It's also tileable, but can't show it here yet. We want to vary the scale of this texture, and it doesn't need to correspond perfectly with a panel, with a specific panel. It can, on the contrary, it shouldn't correspond. It's better if it doesn't correspond with a panel. And this texture gets added to this texture. Well, not directly, but in the end, it gets added to this texture. And this texture has, in the green channel that I'm using, has these neutral gray middle values in the middle, where the panel is just flat. On the edges, I'll have a white or lighter color, and then wherever the panel is protected, or wherever parts of the texture are protected, you'll have a darker color, where you're less likely to have a scratch. So I call this map, I call it the scratch likeliness map. Now, if you just add them together, then on some parts here in the middle, you'll have 0.5, that middle gray value, and sometimes higher than 0.5. So it'll be quite, yeah, and then along the edges it will be black, or sorry, it will be white everywhere since it's white here. So what I do is I have an offset, which also adds which is a bit of a negative number here. You could use a positive number and subtract, but I personally rather prefer to have a negative number, because I kind of know what's happening then. Which also brings down some of the values here, and which means that sometimes there's no scratch here, and sometimes there's a scratch in the middle, and you have quite a range of a larger range of stuff going on and more variation. However, if you see many tiles behind each other, it will be kind of similar. You'll have like a similar chip at a similar spot. So you will see like two tiling patterns on top of each other. Okay, so that's why I add these nodes, which is more or less the same thing as this thing. So it's this, except that for this I use the blue channel, which is just a bunch of clouds, tiling obviously, and we're stretching this out over many different tiles, so we're making this a very large scale texture, which you also just add in here. However, if we just add this in, we'll have like a very strong effect. Like we'll have just hardly any paint where the clouds are, and hardly any scratches where it's black, or depends on this thing. Depends on the offset. That's our most important value to control. So that's why I decrease the strength of this a bit. So multiply it so the values that we're adding here are just lower values and are closer together. Alright, so all of that combined creates a scratch map, which is different for every tile. After that, we'll add the normal. So we already have normal detail in here. The normal of the paint, of course. So those kind of paint bubbles, which are kind of strong here, but I want you guys to see them, see what's going on. So they go in here, and I want to combine this with the normal map. Now I'm gonna skip yeah, pause this tilting. Imagine it's just straight from here to here, and we're not having this thing. So what I basically want is I want my normal map from my panel and the normal map from my paint. I want to see both of them. If I just lerp them, I'll have like the average, so I'll tone down both normal maps. I have like a weaker end result. Now you can add normal maps together in Unreal, because normal maps in Unreal are like remapped, but to go from -1 to +1 instead of 0 to 1, or instead of 0 to 255 like they are in the images in your files. So here in the shader it's -1 to +1, so we can add them together fairly easy. However, so that's it, this is a custom normal blend. However, if you just add them, then you also add the blue channel, and then the blue channel is almost 2, and if that gets normalized, it means you also have a weaker version of your normal map. So I don't want to add the blue channel in there. I want to see the effects of the paint and the effects of the panel both, and I don't want to weaken them. So the first thing I do here is with the normal, this will be the texture of the panel. This will be the stuff from that comes from the paint details and so on. So first I'm going to mask off away the blue channel. So I only have the red and the green channel. Then I'm going to multiply that to control the strength. See how strong these bubbles are. You can make them really subtle in this way. And then, since I can't just add a vector 2 to a vector 3, that doesn't work, I have to append an empty blue channel or a 0 at the end again. So there's a blue channel with 0 inside, and then I can add them together. And that's basically everything that's happening here. The other inputs are just passed on. Now, what are these tilting nodes? Well, since every tile is perfectly flat in 3D, and in the real world it doesn't really happen like that. There's like slight variations. If you look at a bunch of windows in a building, there's like they're like slightly off. Especially you can see this in the reflections. I want to bring some variation in there, and for that I'm using this texture, which has just random values between 0 and 1 in both the red and the green channel. But this has 16,000 this way, 16,000 this way, so I have like a huge variation in here. It's also a very small texture, but it's fine. So first things first, we have to divide this by 16, divide the texture coordinate, or we have to multiply it by 1/16, which ends up being the same thing. So now one tile on this texture, one little square on this texture will correspond to one tile here. Now, since all the values are positive here, I'm going to add -0.5, which means that half of the values should be positive, half of the values should be negative, roughly. I'm not sure about this part of the texture. So some of the panels will tilt in one direction, some in the other direction. So then I want to again multiply, so with a parameter. So right now it's 0, so there's no effect, but if it's 1, it's a very strong effect, so you can tweak how strong this effect is. Now the same thing here goes if you want to add this. You don't want the blue channel in there. We just want to have a slight offset in the entire red and the entire green channel. Now the other way you can remove or zero out the blue channel is to simply multiply it by 110, so multiply the blue channel with 0 and the other channels with 1, and then we add this in. Right, then we have the AO, which we already covered. This is a standard material blend node, and then we have the dirt. Now the dirt is a bunch of different techniques, and if we combine them, we have this subtle dirt in the corners. So there are world-aligned textures you could use, in which case I'm using this one again, so the same, but now it's the it's the red channel here. There's the pre-computed AO mask, which if you build your light you can turn and you can use. So we can multiply them so they're masked. So this dirt is only in those areas. And then a bit more crispness, but we don't need as much as with the scratches. Dirt can be soft. And then I also mask it with some extra noise, which is just an example of how you can use the noise. So that goes into this dirt material layer, which is also a custom material layer, which is fairly straightforward. What do we want to do? Well, not much. It's just in the base color. Yeah, so two lerps, and first in the base color it lerps between the basic value, so that's value A, so that just passes through, and value B, then there's a multiply with a color, with a brownish color. And then in the roughness there's just value A, which just passes through, and then if the mask is white and there should be dirt here, then the roughness will lerp towards this value, which is a preview of 1, and which I think is fine, but you can tweak that. Alright, so then we're at the end, and you see a whole bunch of techniques here to create different effects, and to make your material look as if it's uniquely textured and there's lots of stuff going on, even though there really isn't. There's not much texturing in here at all. So you could make dirt using these techniques, and you could probably make scratches using these techniques, even though the dirt right now is not localized. It doesn't matter where in the panel it is, while the scratches are localized. But you can make a map. Let's say you want like a rust blended in there, so you can make a rust likeliness map as well, which is not the same as the AO, or not the same as the scratch likeliness map, and so on. And you can do those kind of things, and maybe then you use world aligned, or use some noise or something. Careful with noise, it's kind of expensive node. Just looks like one node, but it's like a big one. Alright, so that concludes this material which I've used here. Now these are all BSPs, these are all just brushes. If you want to use this, I'm gonna remove those, sorry. If you want to use this, and it's also not, I'm sorry, first of course we make instances. This is not our base material, is an instance which is applied. This one, where I changed a bunch of stuff. I think you should try, you should use instances as much as possible. Not just because of the performance, but also while making stuff to remain flexible, and to change your materials, and to change this how this normal map looks, and how the metal looks, and how many scratches you have, and all those kind of things. You can instantly change it and instantly see the results. So it gives you a lot of variation, and you can like almost iterate at real time using instances. However, if we want to make a material for our meshes where we use a trim texture, we kind of want a bit of variation on this. So I'm first going to save it, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'll call this m_trim base. There, let's open it. Alright. And we don't really need everything here. For example, the tiling, we don't need the tiling at all. This you won't see different UV tiles within the same prop. That's unnecessary. So I'm going to delete this and just drag this in. Do we need all this dirt? Well, probably not, but maybe you want some dirt. I'm gonna leave this in. But mostly we're gonna change those two textures. Something we haven't yet done is in this material is to use these as parameters as well. They should be parameters too. So this should be the panel normal, and this should be a texture as well. And I should use the same channels for the same information every time I make a texture for this purpose, and this should be panel, and I'll call it scratch AO, because right now that's what we have. So if we save this, actually I think I have another scratch AO that I can use right now. No, I don't. But right now we can plug in like a trim set here, or we can have multiple trim sets, or we can change this to a wall or anything we'd like, and we'll have the same material but different shapes in the normal map and different shapes from the panels. However, if we're using a normal map, sorry, not a normal map, a trim texture, then we could use, or it's useful to use a 2x1 trim texture maybe. And if you use that, it means that your UVs are scaled, basically scaled to counter the scaling inherent in a 2x1 texture, or the other way around, however you want to see it. But that means if we have other textures that are just square textures, those will be stretched. But since our props, we're going to bake our props in our level, they need a second UV set for the light map where everything is unique, since trims notoriously are, well, you pretty much have overlapping everywhere. So you need a second light map UV anyway. We can reuse that light map UVs for the tiling square textures that we're using in this material. So we kind of have to go over all the texture coordinate nodes, and as you can see here, they're set to 0. That means they're using coordinate index 0, which is UV map channel 1 in mux. So if we make map channel 2 in mux, this should be UV texture UV index, or coordinate index 1 instead. So you see that 0 in between the square brackets is now a 1. So we should pretty much do this everywhere, and we should also do it in our paint. Now, okay, I already did it some time ago. Now you might say, okay, but if this uses texture 1, how about, or UV index coordinate set 1, how about BSPs or brushes or meshes that don't have a light map channel? Well, if you don't have this texture set, Unreal will actually default to using the first UV set. So that actually works out fine. I mean, it doesn't break by changing this to 1, it doesn't break this material layer for the purposes of using it on BSPs or on brushes that don't have this texture set. So that's fine. No, I'm in the wrong material now. So here, and you can make many other alterations, like I said, with the dirt, and maybe you want to add rust and so on and so on and so on. But this is our base, alright, and just to make sure, I'll save. And then you want to use instances. Now, you can use, or you can create an instance from the base material, but you can create also an instance from another instance. So if I create this, it's like a child, like its direct parent is the base here, and this is like a instance level 1. Now what you want to do in instance level 1 is tweak your base materials, like how bumpy do you want your paint to be, how shiny do you want your paint to be, how big and or fine do you want it to be, all those kind of things. That you should change that in the first level, but you shouldn't really apply this, or you can apply it in your level, but you should have another level or another another set of instances which inherit from this instance. So let's say from this instance we're going to change this paint scale, roughness max and minimum. Let's just whatever, and any values, we just change them to long values, right? So these 3 values, if we save this, and if I now create an instance from this one, it will instantiate, or it will remember these values, since you don't want those values to vary too much between one material and the other material. And then you can use the second level to change the color and so on. So they're using like the same kind of paint with different colors. I think that works best. And then there's also two textures, of course, that you can change, which yeah, I don't really have a second texture map imported. I have others, but they're not imported. But then you can also, in that second level of instances, change those textures around as well. Alright, so I think that's what you should do, and that's what you should make. Yeah, you should use this example as a base, and now make a variation. All the techniques that are here, combine them in new ways, and make your unique material. Maybe add like a few more layers, maybe some dirt, or yeah, different kind of dirt. I mean, like grease or something, or whatever it is that your level needs. And maybe you can remove most of this stuff, or make it much more subtle or something. You don't need to have all of this in there. It's just a showcase of different techniques. Okay, I think that concludes the video and this explanation, and thank you for watching.